Hello again, everybody. Welcome to my Deep Wreck Diver YouTube channel again. Lots of you on my videos have seen me recovering artifacts from different ships and bringing them up to the surface, and they've been really important often in identifying shipwrecks. Lots of you have asked me questions about whether it's legal to do that in the UK, whether it's ethical. So I'm really pleased today to have the man who can answer all the questions about the legal aspects of artifact recovery. This is Steve White, who is the receiver of wreck. It's a UK government position. He's going to tell us about the history of his position and his current responsibilities. So welcome to my channel, Steve.
Thanks everybody for tuning in to watch this. I think the Dom's channel reaches out to a great number of divers out there, and it's a great opportunity for me to get to broadcast the message to everybody in terms of what the role of the receiver of wreck is and what to do in cases where you do remove artifacts or items from shipwrecks. So the role of receiver of wreck is quite an unusual one. It's been around for a long time in terms of the law in relation to wreck and salvage. But actually, the role started in 1854 in the Merchant Shipping Act, where it was first mentioned. But this was basically to do with wrecks that were coming on the shore. So the government, probably losing a bit of revenue at the time, decided that they would try and put something in place to basically prevent plundering of these vessels that were sort of wrecking on the shoreline. So there's tales of sort of church services going on the coast and then the bells ringing out, and then suddenly the pews were emptied as all the villagers ran down to the coast, which alerted them to the fact that a wreck was there. So that's why the role was introduced. And back in 1894, when it got amended, basically it gave the permission for a receiver to actually use lethal force to enforce his powers and to prevent plundering. So yes, we had indemnity for violence done by others by the receiver.
I've got to ask, Steve, do you still have these powers?
No, I think if you come on to the next slide, it got repealed. And in fact, I came in just a little bit too late for this. But you can see from the slide, 1926, it got repealed, and then we could fire over people's heads as a warning. So yeah, we weren't probably in 1926 allowed to kill people. So eventually it wore itself down. But yeah, now we haven't got that sort of power. But that's just another slide which basically shows the 1854 Act as it's written, but also just an image on the right hand side of what was happening around the coast of the UK, where it was pretty unsafe to navigate the waters around the coastline. So you were getting a lot of wrecks coming up on the rocks. Obviously, things are a little bit better now in terms of safety of navigation. So with the passing of the Act in 1854, basically it was done in order to give owners an opportunity of having their property returned and ensure that any salvage was done legitimately and that people would be entitled to a salvage award for actually their honesty in declaring the items. But it's also interesting to know that the receiver of wreck is impartial. So we get, obviously, wreck items declared to us, probably around about 300 to 350 items or droits reported to us every single year. But we have to then liaise with the owners, but we are not on anyone's side. So we act impartially between both owner and salver.
Can I just pick up there on the use of the term droit there, which is obviously I think one that lots of people will be unfamiliar with. So it just, if you kind of expand a bit on that, Steve.
Yeah, it originated in France, I think, but it also relates to the droit of Admiralty, which came in around that time. So a droit, from our purposes, is basically a record of that particular dive and what you've taken. So what we ask people to do is, if they're declaring an item, they when they do declare it, it gets given a unique reference number, and that will be called your droit number. It's your case number. But if you do a wreck you dive on, say, 2 wrecks in one day, then we would expect 2 droits. So one report for each of those wrecks that you dived on. If you're diving over 2 or 3 days on the same wreck, then we would expect, if it was 2 days, there'd be 2 droits, one for the first day and then another droit for the second day, because it just keeps it separate for us. So a droit is a collection of items. So each droit might have, I mean, we've had up to 300 droits on 300 items on one droit, just because that was all done in particularly one day on an archaeological dive, for example. So in terms of items, we probably get about 1,000 items declared to us every single year. But in terms of droits or cases or individual cases, probably around about 300 to 350. So we are a single post. So I am based in Southampton. I have a deputy, Andrea Bailey. And our primary role is administering the reports of wreck that come in, the droits that come in. I can devolve some of my powers. So at times I can give the Coast Guard officers the powers of the receiver. So I'll just go into a little bit in terms of how we work. So the law in relation to wreck and salvage is covered in Part 9 of the Merchant Shipping Act, 1995. There's been several amendments. That's the last amendment. The thing with the Merchant Shipping Act, 1995, is that although it addressed or changed the language behind it, it didn't really change the law that much. The Merchant Shipping Act, as I found and taken over the role in sort of like late 2023, is it's only around about 15 pages long, but it's some of it can be open to interpretation. Now, I think that over the last 2 years, I've sort of determined what the law means, but sometimes it is questioned by salvors. I do have those answers, hopefully. So the reason why it got amended in 1995 is because it brought in the Salvage Convention of 1989. And that basically reinforced the claims that salvage must be for the safe return of the property to the owner, and that salvage fee will be awarded based on the criteria set in Article 13. So yes, it incorporates the first page of Part 9 of the Merchant Shipping Act, incorporates the Salvage Convention 1989. And this is basically to ensure that salvors do things properly. They do that for a particular purpose or benefit, and that there's a mechanism in place to be rewarded for that. So the recovery of items from shipwrecks and shoreline basically has to have a useful result, and it has to be done in a way that safely recovers or saves that property. So this doesn't necessarily, which is one of the big sort of myths and conceptions that we get, is that it has to be for the benefit of returning the property to the owner. It's not for the benefit of putting something onto your mantelpiece or finders keepers. Most of the wrecks out there will have an owner, and if it's within 12 nautical miles, then the wreck item does become property of the Crown, and it's down then to the Crown to dispose of that. So one of the things, the misconceptions, is that I found it, I get to keep it. It's not quite the case. Once you declare it, the receiver will look into ownership. And if there is no owner, the chances are you'll probably get that item in lieu of a salvage award if it's not valuable or historically significant. But you can't just assume that because I found it, I get to keep it.
In kind of real layman's terms, Steve, the kind of the sequence of events is somebody owns some property, somebody loses it on the seabed. However that happened, a diver or somebody else finds the item, brings it to the surface, tells you about it. You then try and figure out who owns it. And if you can find who owns it, then there's a negotiation takes place over salvage, i.e. how much the salver can legitimately claim for it. And if you can't find an owner, you decide what happens to it, basically.
Yes, that's right. So if there's no owner within 12 nautical miles, it reverts to the Crown. And I will dispose of the property on behalf of the Crown. And I'll come on to it in later slides in terms of how we factor that in and what our role is in relation to that. Outside of 12 nautical miles, the Crown doesn't get a say in it, although I can decide on ownership. So the next slide is around our duties, and this is to encourage salvors to take actions towards preservation of wrecked vessels and the lives of shipwrecked persons, prevent plundering and reuniting property with owner, which is the main aspect, and obviously dispose of that property. This is just an interesting slide just to show the sort of powers that the receiver has. So we can detain vessels. One of the interesting ones on there is the right of way across private land. So in order to recover property and prevent plundering, we've got the right of way to cross private land, which was something. I'm a former police officer, and some of these powers were applicable to police as well. Seize, detain property, search vessels, and demand immediate handover of wreck material. So those are all the powers that are covered under Part 9 of the Merchant Shipping Act.
I've got to pick this up, Steve, because people obviously, when they heard that a former policeman was becoming the receiver of wreck, there was lots of eyebrows raised out there. And how useful do you think that your background has been in this role?
It's been invaluable, to be honest, because you've got to. So there's a process behind everything, and also we are a public-facing service. So we are dealing with the public on a regular basis. Although it's a small proportion of the public that are regular divers, we are still providing a service, which is what I did for 30 years in the police force. But it's also about managing that process. Now, I think it's fair to say that the receiver of wreck over the years gone past has struggled to keep on top of the amount of joints that are being declared. I think in the last 2 years, we've reduced that number down to a much more realistic level. We're now in a position where we are able to resolve on ownership within a year, and people are getting items close to them a lot quicker. And a lot of our backlog now, we're going through some of the historical cases that have got some legal challenges to them, but certainly my background in the police has enabled me to manage those processes and deal with policy a lot better. But also the role, it's unique in terms of I have to be a lawyer in terms of a legal expert. I have to be a chief negotiator. I have to know the law backwards. So I think there's a lot of similarities, and being a former detective sergeant is really helped me in terms of getting into this role. But
fantastic.
It's a big steep learning curve as well, because prior to getting into this role, although I had a fascination like all kids do with shipwrecks and history and museums, it's been a very steep learning curve.
Yeah, I guess this isn't a kind of area of law that most policemen get involved with very much. And I just want to say, Steve, as somebody who has had a lot of droits, both kind of current and historic ones, closed really quickly, on behalf of all of us out there who have had that, I'd just like to say thank you very much, because it was a gripe for a very long time, the whole thing where people would say my droit hasn't been closed in 12 months. So to get them done so quickly is really nice. And I think am I still the record holder for droit closure?
What, the fastest one closed?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's the good thing about some of the process we brought in terms of we've now got a big database of who owns what wreck. So quite often if people declare items of wreck, if that wreck is known, we all know straight away who the owner is. It could be a private individual, it could be Department for Transport. So we don't have to then start doing that research over and over again. We've got all of our profiles more or less up to speed with who the owners are, the inquiries we've made to establish that ownership. So by getting that up to speed, it allows us to close joints a lot quicker. And so, yes, you had one of those where we knew who the owner was. It resolved within the same day. And yes, you got it resolved. I think it's within that day or the second day.
Yeah. It was super, super quick. Yes. Absolutely incredible. So thank you very much. Anyway, that was a bit of a digression.
So I get asked this question quite a bit, and we get a lot of emails coming in about things they find on the shoreline. What is wreck? It's anything that comes from a vessel, hovercraft, an airplane that's in the sea. So it's all wreck from the sea that's been washed ashore, but it has to have come from a wreck. So we get this question a lot with people finding stuff on the seashore. It could be a sword. Now, a lot of our shoreline is receded quite a bit with a lot of landfalls. There were potential cemeteries, burying points up on cliff tops that have now fallen down onto the shoreline. So it's not definite that it is wreck. It's come from a vessel. So it may well be a land-based find. So what we do is we also encourage finders to report them to the local museum, where there be a local finds liaison officer. So it's recorded both as a land find and a sea find, because we can't say definitely it is wreck. But the main thing from this, it has to come from a vessel. And just to remind people that it's up to the high tide mark. So even if you're walking on the beach and you find a brooch or something along those sort of lines, you still have to report it legally if you want to keep it eventually.
So as somebody who dives quite a long way offshore, quite a lot, the last bullet point, the last bit of this is interesting. Well, international waters landed in the UK. So that's, I guess, stuff outside the 12-mile limit, but brought into the UK.
Yes, yeah. So they still, under Section 236 of the Merchant Shipping Act, they still have to be reported to the receiver of wreck, and then we will deal with that as we would do with the wreck within 12 nautical miles, except for the Crown wouldn't get title to that item. So you're right. Most of the technical divers like yourself are diving on wrecks that are far out to sea, but yeah, once they're brought into the UK, they have to be declared.
And do exclusive economic zones play any part in this? There's kind of like a line, isn't there, between England and France in the middle of the Channel, and between England or Britain and Ireland in the, well?
There is, but no is the short answer to that. There's nothing within the Merchant Shipping Act which talks about the EEZ. It talks about United Kingdom waters, which is determined to be 12 nautical miles. But it also says anything outside of that has to be, if it's brought into United Kingdom waters, has to be declared. So no, the EEZ isn't mentioned at all, but you could be diving in Bermuda. But if you bring that item back into the UK, you then have to declare it. This is a slide in terms of what the legal definition of wreck is, and you'll often hear this talked about in terms of flotsam, jetsam, derelict, or lagan. They've all got particular meanings. I won't go what all the meanings are, but the main one that we deal with is derelict, which is property that has been abandoned without hope of recovery by the owner. So most of the wreck items that we get come under derelict, and you'll see, and I'm sure Dom, you'll probably recognise the image in the bottom left-hand side of there is an item of wreck. It's something that was on a vessel that went down, abandoned by its owner. So yes, that becomes derelict.
I do recognise it. It's currently soaking in fresh water in the to try and get as much salt out as possible. But yes, I thank you.
So again, another question: how do you report it? So obviously, most divers are aware of this now, but we do have a website and a portal on the gov.uk website, similar to applying for your tax renewal on your vehicle. Really, you start the process by hitting the green button on the right hand side, and it takes you to a form to start filling in, and that comes straight onto our database. So we answer and we send an acknowledgement letter within 24 hours, unless it's on a Saturday or Sunday, be it first thing Monday morning. But yeah, you'll get an acknowledgement letter from us within 24 hours, which will acknowledge the fact you've reported it and the item that you've reported. One thing I would say about reporting it online is that it will ask you for a photograph of it. We're trying to amend the front of that just to basically warn people that the image has to be less than 5 megabytes. It's similar to most government websites now in terms of, smart cameras now can take very detailed photographs, and the size of which would overload a lot of our systems. So yes, it's worth noting before you start that you won't be able to finish it until you download that photograph, and it just has to be under 5 megabytes. We still occasionally accept the paper reports. If you go onto the website, you will have the opportunity to download a PDF version of it and send it by post. But what happens then is you fill it all in, it comes into me, then I've got to duplicate exactly what you've done, which takes time. So if you can do it online, it saves us a lot of work. And you can always follow that up by an email into us with any additional information that you might have. Or if and if you've got additional photographs, because you can only upload one, you can send it by email to us. But we'll always respond to any emails within 24 hours as well.
I have to say, I love the online system, Steve. It's a massive improvement in my view. And the fact that you can go in there and see all your previous droits and everything, just, I guess it's the way these kind of processes should work in the 21st century, isn't it? So
absolutely. I get asked this question a bit as well in terms of why do we require image of the items? A lot of the backlog of our droits were done because we didn't have images. And so if someone declared the fact that they had, say, for example, a ship's bell, we would want to see that bell because we would have to contact potential museums that the museum might be interested in acquiring it. They would ask us for a photograph so they could assess it. We also like to show an owner potentially. So the owner might want to have a look to see if they want the item returned. So we need the image of them. Valuations, so they will come into play later on. Certainly if there's a salvage fee required for it, we'd probably have to get some valuations. And because we're one post in Southampton and I cover the whole of the UK, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, there's a lot of traveling on my part to collect items. So photographs really, really help. And you've got to remember when there was many receivers dotted around the country, they could be taken into the local receiver's office who could have a look at that item and take notes and mark things down. But in today's technology, we do require a photograph. It doesn't say it in the Merchant Shipping Act, but in order for me to do my job properly and have a look at either selling that item to a museum or just getting some expert opinion on that item, I do need a photograph. And to be fair, I would say probably 99% of the divers do supply photographs now. So that's why we require the images.
Are you going to talk later on about providing to museums? Because
Yes.
obviously that's fantastic. So that is I think a thing that lots of people would like to take probably more advantage of than currently happens.
Yeah. Another question we get posed quite a bit is, why do we need the exact location of the recovery? There's a few reasons for that. Again, I get argued that it doesn't say that I have to do that in the Merchant Shipping Act, but you've got to remember that the main primary role with the introduction of the Salvage Convention is that the role of the receiver is to reunite property with owner. And we do rely on mapping quite a bit. We use different software. We use Wrecksite EU as one of the main things, which lets us know what wrecks are in the vicinity. So 6 miles south of Falmouth doesn't really help us when there's a number of wrecks there. We need to know the exact coordinates. And this is to verify, first of all, whether it's inside or outside 12 nautical miles. So tell us the location, we can then know, because they're treated slightly differently. We obviously plot the finds on a map, which basically shows us what wrecks are in that particular area. But not only that, but it also shows us what other finds have been in that particular area. So you could be diving on a wreck and bring something up from an unknown wreck, but actually we had the bell declared to us a year ago. So we know what that wreck is. It just hasn't been acknowledged yet because the finder of the bell didn't want it to go on to Wrecksite EU or to UKHO. So we get a better idea of what's coming up from what particular area. But yeah, I think all locations that are provided to us, because there's, again, a lot of protectiveness around wrecks. People don't want other divers knowing where they've dived. None of the information provided in terms of location is ever shared on any Freedom of Information reports or with any other government bodies. I've been asked for that location data a number of times and successfully been able to refuse that on the basis of that as confidential information, that I need to do my job, but I wouldn't get the salvers agreement to provide it if I was to share that information. So yes, locations are provided in confidence, but it just now enables me to find an owner to reunite property with owner.
I mean, you probably know this, Steve, but I think it's probably worth just mentioning and also chatting about is dive boat skippers often won't tell the divers where they're diving. So I mean, a good example actually is the item of mine that I've just that you showed earlier on came from a wreck called the Kingsbridge. I don't actually know where the Kingsbridge is, and I've obviously had that discussion backwards and forwards with Andrea because the skipper hasn't shared that information with me. So it's kind of, it can be tricky, it can put divers in a tricky position, that one. Yeah,
and what I'd advise in those circumstances is to provide me with the details of the boat skipper, and I'll contact the boat skipper direct to try and find out where he was diving. I need to do a lot of work, and a lot of the outreach I'm doing is around dive clubs, going to speak to them as well as boat skippers as well, and trying to educate them in terms of, look, I need to know the location because otherwise it's preventing me from doing my job, and then I potentially can't give something in lieu of salvage if I can't guarantee where that's come from. So yeah, there's still a lot of work to do on that, basis, but I'm hoping over the next year or two that I'll start spreading the word a bit more, and that some of these boat skippers will start trusting the receiver in terms of not giving those locations out to anybody. So this is just a note in terms of what the receiver does. So there is a statutory year, 12-month, or a year and 1 day law that people refer to a lot of the time, which tells us how quickly an owner has to be established. So an owner has got to establish their claim to the wreck within a year and 1 day. Now, quite often, if it's within 12 nautical miles and we don't get that reply, we get a lot of finders saying to us, well, you haven't found anything for a year day, you've got to give it to me. Well, it's not quite the case, because it still then belongs to the Crown. So the Crown still has to decide on what they're going to do with that item. Anything over £5,000 has to be reported to Lloyd's of London. The wreck is usually held by the salvor on indemnity to the receiver. We haven't got a massive warehouse to take in all articles of wreck. Would be absolutely swamped. So everything's on a case-by-case basis, but generally what we'll do is we'll ask the finder to keep it safe until they hear back from us. Now, I am aware that we've had droits sometimes open for 12, 15 years, which is totally unacceptable. But I think we've made massive strides to try and ensure that we do dispose of property or make a decision on property much, much quicker than that. But yeah, so there is an expectation that the finder will keep it safe for that particular year. Of course, I have got the power to have it delivered, but that would cost the receiver money and in terms of conservation and keeping that safe. We also do a lot of research, so we've got access to various databases that we'll try and find out who owned that vessel, or whether that vessel was insured by somebody, whether the insurance was paid out. But there's also a difference between whether it's an item of cargo, a personal possession, or whether that's part of the ship's fixtures and fittings. If it's of historic importance, I'll often seek advice from experts, and I've found experts in clay pipes and forward jugs. We have got a wealth of information and people that we would trust from sort of different museums that would give us expert advice on items. And the thing is that we will always take the salvor's wishes into consideration. That doesn't probably always seem to every diver that we do that. Many divers want items to go into their local museum, but it also depends on what the owner wants with that as well. A good example would be with MOD, where the MOD will often want as a first port of call item to go into the National Museum of the Royal Navy. However, the diver might want it to go into a local museum. So I have to sort of try and be independent in that view and try and negotiate the best I can for both the salvor and the owner. Closure and outcomes. So the year's passed, it's been on my desk or in my database for the year. And then I have to negotiate a potential salvage award or return of the item. Of course, as you know, Dom, that can be done a lot sooner than the 12 months. If I can identify an owner within a day, then I can get that closed very, very quickly. But a lot of wreck comes from an unknown wreck, 26 miles offshore, in which case, then if no owners come forward within a year, then it would probably be awarded to the finder in lieu of a salvage award. If an owner's found, then what we try and do is negotiate. So we'll obviously look to get valuations done on the property. So if the finder is insisting on having a salvage award for that, we'll get that item valued. We'll probably do 3 valuations. If the valuation costs money, and hopefully we've got a few sort of people that will give us free valuations, it's just a starting point on what the value of that item is, and then we can go to the owner and to the finder to try and seek the best solution in terms of what that salvage fee should be. The entitlement to a salvage award acknowledges the finder's service to the owner. So this is a reward for honesty, really, and declaring the item for the good of returning that to the finder, keeping the item safe and in the best condition it can be, that the owner can have that back. The criteria set out in terms of how much salvage fee you'll get for an item is set out in Article 13 of the Salvage Convention, and it talks about there's a list of different criteria, and it could depend on the skill of the salvor, it could depend on the danger and the risk that was posed to the salvor. So there's a number of criteria that come into it. So I suppose a way of looking at it is if you walk along the beach and you pick something up and you take it home and you declare it, how much skill have you provided and training have you got to do that? What was the risk that was posed to you in doing that? So for someone jumping onto a burning vessel in really rough seas and rough weather and putting their lives in danger, you're looking at, probably 90 to 100% of the award, whereas actually walking on the beach and picking something up probably doesn't entitle you to that much. But what I can say is that you can never have an award that's more than 100% the value of the item, even if your costs are, in terms of diving, hire the boat, that doesn't really come into it. It comes down to what the value of that item is, and you can't have an award that is more than the value of that item. And any expenses incurred by the receiver in terms of valuation costs, or if I have to go and pick it up, the time that I spend doing that, that can be recovered from any valuation figure as well. So we don't really like selling items. The Merchant Shipping Act says that unclaimed wrecks shall be sold by the receiver. We don't. We generally give things in lieu of salvage unless the item is worth so much money that really we'll probably then have to sell it.
Just out of interest, does this happen often?
Which bit?
The salvage awards.
Yes, there are times where people do demand a salvage award. I mean, if you look at some cases, the Talawa silver hit the news 2024. I think the judgment was done on that, but that was 2,600 bars of silver worth around about £50 million. I've negotiated fees over workboats that were recovered from the shoreline worth, say, £50,000-60,000, and finders declaring that they want money for the return of that vessel. We do still have issues. I mean, I even recently had a porthole that was declared to me that was probably valued at around about £300, but the finder thought it was worth a lot more than that. The owner saying they want it back and aren't going to be paying more than £200 for the item. So I do have to sort of act as a mediator really between owner and salver over what that fee should be.
Tell you what, must be a lovely porthole to be worth £300.
Yeah, very, very shiny. But yeah, those are the sort of things that I have to sort of act as a negotiator for and try and mediate and put the people's expectations in terms of what they are likely to get. I can't determine what that fee will be. I can't set it. So I can't say, well, okay, the item's worth £50,000. You need to pay £30,000 to the finder. I can't do that. All I can do is really negotiate and look at what a fair settlement should be that both parties agree to. If there is a real dispute between both of them, the only person that can decide on how much that fee is going to be is a court. These are just some of the common fines that we get. Obviously, ship's bells, as Dom educated me about, is you find a ship's bell, you've got to drop the skipper's pants and kiss him on the arse, I think is right, Dom, isn't it?
Yeah, that's. I'm not sure it's entirely universal, but it's certainly. It's certainly, yeah. Some skippers insist on that. So, but that's the kind of, other than I guess gold and diamonds and stuff. That's the thing that all divers dream of finding. Is it bell? Yeah,
bells, makers, plates, anything that would identify that wreck. And I appreciate that is probably the main thing that divers are looking for, apart from treasure. But the common things we get: crockery, glassware, spoons, ship's lamps, telegraphs. We get a lot of those items. They're the sort of most common items that we get declared to us.
Good. Probably not so many of these though.
No, but we still get quite a few. A lot of dredge companies submit bits of aluminium frame to us. But one thing that most people don't realise, if you're recovering items from aircraft, they come under the Protection of Military Remains Act, or POMRA. So they will be protected. You can't be given those in lieu of salvage. They will probably have to go to a museum, and they are protected. If you're knowingly diving on an item that is protected, The Navy, or sort of the MOD, basically are the key stakeholders on that, and they can take out prosecutions on people that remove stuff from protected wrecks. But it's just to remember that all items from aircraft do come under the protections of Military Remains Act. This is just some items from, say, the Holswell, but we've got a number of historic and protected wrecks all around the UK waters. And these are the sort of archaeological stuff that we get back, that we try and find homes for in museums.
So, I mean, just talk through what we've got here, Steve.
The sort of things that we get from the protected wrecks are going to be coins. We get dinars, we get all sorts of different sort of coinage from these wrecks. We get obviously jewelry from those wrecks, but some of the things around how the ship is constructed, we get wooden deadeyes, and we get a sense of how people lived in those historic times and what they were taking on board vessels. So from an historian's point of view, it's fantastic value, because they just want to learn as much as they can around the techniques and shipbuilding around those times and the sort of property people were taking with them. So yeah, those historic wrecks are. This is a slide on just unusual finds. To some extent. So, for example, you've got a gas mask. The item in the middle is funny enough, it's a beer vat that got washed out to sea. So it got declared to us, but it wouldn't necessarily become wreck because it isn't from a vessel. You've got an elephant tusk. Now, that gave us sort of some issues around that, because the Merchant Shipping Act says that the receiver shall sell items of wreck that are unclaimed. It's very, very difficult to sell ivory. In fact, I'd be breaking the law if I did. So that gave us a few issues. Museums don't tend to like to take items of ivory, because there is some connection with the slave trade, which is a quite sensitive issue for some.
So I've got to ask Steve, what did you do with the tusk then? What happened to it?
I've got it under review by a lawyer at the moment. We made the decision that, because I can't give it in lieu of salvage, because if I gave it in lieu of salvage, that would constitute a financial transaction. So at the moment, I've just said, you're the finder of this. Here's the law in relation to CITES. It's yours. I'm not going to be selling that, but I can't use the terminology lieu of salvage. But I am getting some sort of work done on that to give me some definite answer, rather than my own interpretation of how I should deal with that.
I guess situations like that, you just kind of wish they hadn't declared it.
Yeah, sometimes you do. But the thing is once you've resolved on one item like that, it sets the precedent for how you're going to deal with other items. So yeah, a lot of thought went into how we deal with items of ivory. But we've got a process now and a standard letter wording that we will send out if someone recovers ivory. But at the same time, legal advice sometimes takes a while to come back. So we'll wait for a number of items or a number of things that we've raised with the legal team to come back to me, so we've got some sort of definitive answer. But you're absolutely right. It's a fascinating job in terms of you come into work and you get a number of emails and you're thinking, I've never dealt with this before, or this situation. So yes, it does make it really, really interesting.
Yeah. Onto drones, I think, which is obviously, I guess one of the, drones, you must have had a lot more of these in recent years.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is drones, I suppose if I'm not sure if that one was flown from a ship, but again, it doesn't become wreck, or isn't it? If it's flown from the land, it probably isn't wreck. But if it's flown from a ship, it could be. So yes, everything you get, it makes you think about, is this wreck material? Isn't it wreck material? You've got a hot tub or a jacuzzi on the bottom right hand picture there, and that actually came off of a sort of super cruiser that it fell off the back of, so that would be wreck.
Presumably that's currently in your back garden, is it? Or
No, not my back garden, but yeah, it's again, a lot of things that we deal with, well, nearly everything we deal with is voluntary salvage. Whereas if you've got an insurance company and you've lost items, you'll pay a contractor to come do the salvage operation for you. So although we should be notified of commercial salvage, we're not. We mainly deal with voluntary salvage.
And the thing in the middle?
That, if anyone's got any ideas, that'd be great. But somebody found that on a beach. Don't know if that came from a wreck or not. It could have some significance, but we get a lot of items like that declared to us that you think, we don't know what that is. So, and quite often I'll reach out to museums or archaeological bodies and say, look, have you got any ideas? But yeah, we get a lot of stuff reported to us that we just have no idea about.
So that's a piece of wood with some kind of carvings or markings in it, and then some rope wrapped around the top. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And it's probably only about an inch high, I think. So it could be just a sailor whittling away something on a ship and made himself a little sculpture. It could have more significance than that. But yeah, we just don't know.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Okay, so this is just coming on to the offences that people commit by not reporting items of wreck. So these are some of the laws that I have to consider around people's activity at sea. So you could be diving on wrecks that are protected under the Protection of Wrecks Act. I have to look at UNESCO, for example. And although that's not ratified by the UK, a lot of government agencies and museums are taking that as their policy. That main policy is that nothing that is over 100 years old shall be bought, sold, or bartered. So that's something I have to figure in, even though it's not law. When I do get items that are of significant age or of heritage value, I have to look at, well, although the law says I shall sell it, is it right and proper that we lose items of significant UK heritage to potentially an auction site which could be purchased by anybody anywhere in the world? Or do I look at a museum that might have an interest that may want to buy it? So I shall sell it to a museum, for example. So yeah, UNESCO does come into part of my thinking.
Just picking up on that one then. So obviously 100 years old, lots of First World War wrecks around the British shores. I've dived lots of other people have, and typically, let's say for instance I find a bell on a First World War wreck, all of a sudden that comes into this category. What's the kind of thinking, how does UNESCO influence that then?
Okay, so UNESCO would influence, if I didn't find an owner for something, the law in the Wreck and Salvage law under Part 9 of the Merchant Shipping Act says the receiver shall sell the item and then split the price or the profit from that item between the salver and the Treasury in terms of the consolidated fund, depending on the proportion that we agree on. But because the Salvage Convention says you shall sell it, that conflicts with what UNESCO says as well. So in the example you've given, quite often the wreck is either owned by the MOD or it may have sold it to somebody, but quite often there's an owner for it. So if it's the MOD, for example, we have to consider whether the MOD are going to be willing to pay a salvage fee for that particular item, or whether you're quite happy to donate that item to a museum. Now, the simplest option is the donation to museum, because it basically keeps that item safe for generations if it's an accredited museum. And I use that term. We would like things to go to museums, but accredited is also our first choice. I think most divers may be aware of what happened with the Charlestown Museum in terms of when that folded, or they sold that and all the items were sold from there. So putting in a museum isn't always safe, but from an accredited museum, they can't just dispose of property. It will be there for generations and looked after for generations. So yeah, we'll always try and get that item donated by the finder that might consider that significant. But yeah, UNESCO comes into it in terms of my power to sell it. There's nothing that says I can't sell it in terms of the law, and the law will always trump policy. But I have got a responsibility towards UK heritage. I think that's just sitting in a public body and not wanting to see something, say from the Victory, sold to Canada or United States of America and being kept in the UK. The other things we have to think about are things like the Fraud Act, so lying on the form or failing to complete a form carrying fraud. Theft, if you're not declaring it, are you stealing it? Potentially yes, if you're looking to keep things for yourself without allowing the receiver to try and find an owner. Firearms Act, people removing live ammunition from shipwrecks, taking them home and leaving live ammunition in their home. We've had horrendous cases of people taking things home and trying to take the sort of like warhead off a shell, if you like, and blowing themselves up. So we've had instances like that in the past. So there are a number of acts and sections and law that we refer to, that we rely on in terms of if we had to go down to that prosecution route. The main offences that we would be looking at from a receiver of wreck is obviously the failing to report wreck. So section 236 makes it a duty, a lawful duty, anybody that finds wreck material to declare it. Failing to declare it, you could get a fine. I think it's up to sort of £2,500 per item. Some people will take wreck material out of the UK to sell it. But again, we've got to prove they are looking to go and sell it. So we get that. Failing to deliver items to the receiver of wreck under section 237. So if the receiver makes the decision that the item is so valuable that it should be delivered to the receiver, or just because the receiver wants that item because of maybe a lack of cooperation by the finder, if you fail to deliver it to the receiver, you can get up to a fine of £2,500. And concealing wreck or defacing identifying marks within that wreck, that comes with a fine as well. So there are a number of offences that can be committed under the Merchant Shipping Act.
I guess there's the big one is probably the one down the bottom, which is, I know, not part of your jurisdiction, but
no, it's not, and I get asked about this a lot. Obviously, this is something set by the MMO, so we've got a little bit of a common sense approach to this. So, and I'm not really au fait with the exact wording within the MMO, but if something is so heavy, say a telegraph, a bridge telegraph, for example, that it couldn't be lifted to the surface without lifting gear, then we have got a duty to report that to the MMO. So what I would say is that if one or two of you can bring it to the surface without lifting gear, then that's absolutely fine by us. But we just have to make sure that if you're starting bringing cannons up and landing them on the ship, and you haven't got an MMO license, then there is going to be repercussions for that. But most of the items, I'll probably say, probably 99.5% of the items that get declared to us, you know that they could have easily been brought up onto the vessel by hand without the need of any lifting equipment whatsoever.
thanks. I can imagine you get asked that a lot. So
I do, but I'm also a realist. I know that for the safety of items, quite often divers will look to use some sort of bag or lifting gear or something small, even for small items to take to the surface. My sort of like my test of that is whether it can be taken up by one or two people together. So what I would say is that if you start putting YouTube videos on of you lifting equipment up onto the ship, then you know you've got to know what the law is in relation to that, and that people will see that video.
And your last slide, isn't it, Steve?
It is the last slide, and I think this is to do with heritage, and I touched on it earlier around about donating to museums. So we will always try and get finders, if it's of real significance to history, we'll try and get a finder to donate it to the museum. There's an example on the slide there which basically shows the bell from the Carentan, or Chasseur number 5, which was a mine sort of sub chaser in World War II. And I managed to get a museum in Normandy in France to take the items and display the items. Obviously, the finder was then invited to the museum to see the items on display, and was really, really happy with the outcome of that. And I think that's the important thing to remember, is that sometimes you'll bring things up from wrecks that could have some real historical value, some real heritage value. The museums nowadays are creaking at the seams. They haven't got a lot of storage facilities at the moment. They're also very short of money and aren't going to pay a lot of salvage fees for anything. So donation is probably what we'd probably look to try and do. We will try and get the museum to work with the finder in terms of putting the item on display. It's not always possible. I get asked this question a lot in terms of, well, if I hand it over, will it go on display or will it just go into a storage cupboard? The chances are that those items are bought out for particular occasions or themes, but they will be kept in cupboards. But the one thing with accredited museums is that they keep those items forever. And one thing that I've encountered since taking on to this role is a number of divers that are probably coming into their sort of 70s or 80s now that were diving regularly in the sort of 70s and 80s, 1970s and 1980s, that they are going to at some point pass away and they're going to leave a garage full of items that aren't going to have any provenance to it, that are possibly going to be disposed upon by a relative because they won't know the significance of those items. And so we really want to work with finders around keeping those items for the nation for as long as possible. So yes, donation is one of the most satisfying things I have in my job, because I know that that item is going to be cared for and looked after for generations.
I have to say, I'm really grateful to the support you gave me in two items. The first thing was the bell of the HMCS Trentonian that obviously went back to the Canadians, and the second thing was a cup that I found on the hospital ship, the Glenart Castle, that's gone to the Royal Navy and the museum in Portsmouth. And I have to say, I was very pleased with both of those. So thank you for kind of facilitating that, I guess. One thing I just want to mention, though, is you did talk there about people who were diving in the 70s and the 80s, and more recently, frankly, who have got stuff that they've not declared. And you're absolutely right. I'm aware of circumstances where people have passed away and their stuff has been weighed in or has been thrown in wherever, and it kind of horrifies me, as I'm sure it does you and lots of other people. It kind of brings me on to the question, obviously, and I know you get asked this one a lot as well, but I've got to put it out there, which is that there was an amnesty to try and capture a lot of this sort of stuff and to make sure it was properly recorded and everything. And, I guess do you think there's any appetite to do that again?
The short answer is no, there's not. It took a lot of work to do that because you have to get a number of other agencies to agree that. One thing I have said is that I'd recognise anybody that reported something late that wants an item to go into a museum, that they can do so without fear of prosecution. I'm not going to prosecute somebody for that. But if somebody was to bring up 2 cannons tomorrow and not declare them for the next 2 or 3 years, then I'm going to probably look to what I can do around my powers around prosecution. But what I know that in the sort of 70s, 80s, 60s, when diving was relatively new and it was a little bit of a wild west out there, there wasn't the common knowledge there is now, or should be. I mean, ignorance was probably a bit more defense without social media and the internet, but now there isn't that excuse. So what I would say to anybody that's got those things, declare them now. There's a record of it made. I'm not going to be prosecuting you. And at least that way we can find a home for those items in a museum if a museum wanted them, or if the owner wanted them returned. So yes, there's no amnesty, and each case will be taken on its own merits. But generally, I will not be looking to prosecute anybody, and people can reach out to me by email or by phone and contact me, and I can advise them on the next steps that they need to take to do that. But yeah, we've had a number of the bell you can see on the right hand side there, that was recovered from a diver in 1985. He wanted the item to go to a museum, and I facilitated that for him without any fear of him being prosecuted for that, because I felt that he was trying to do the right thing.
Steve, that has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. I know almost certainly this video will be watched by a load of British divers, but it'll also, I'm sure, be watched by loads of people from abroad as well, who will kind of scratch their heads at some of the kind of interesting British ways of doing things. But it's really good of you to take the time to do this and to reach out and to kind of explain the law and all those kind of things. So on behalf of everyone watching it, I just want to say thank you.
I just want to thank everybody for watching the video, and if they've got any questions, then just contact the Receiver Rec office, and we can deal with any of the questions that you have. But we're always here to answer you.
Many thanks, Steve. That's really appreciated. Hope everyone else enjoyed it as well. And if you'd like to see videos where artifacts are being recovered and used to help identify ships, there's a whole load of them on my channel, and there's a playlist you can click on here. I'm sure it goes without saying that they've all been declared to the Receiver of Rec. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you'll like, subscribe, leave a comment, and of course, watch another one. Thank you.